Hello and welcome to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, hosted by EFT trainers Michael Barnett, Dr. Sylvina Irwin, and EFT supervisor Michael Preston. We are excited to bring you this first season of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, Foundations, where Michael, Sylvina, and Michael will be breaking down the fundamental elements of EFT, helping to build your confidence as an EFT clinician.
Hello. Welcome back to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, where we have it all together.
So we can fake it.
Yeah,
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it.
We'll just keep pretending we're not experiencing any technical difficulties today. Well, as always, my name is Michael Preston, as your host, also joined with co-hosts Dr. Sylvina Irwin and Michael Barnett. Welcome to the studio, y'all.
Hey, good to be back with you and you, as always.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
It is good to be here. And yeah, I'll tell you what, I am enjoying just laughing and taking it in stride because getting going today was not the normal pace.
That's one way of putting it.
A good blooper episode.
Yeah, plenty of them. So I am excited about today's episode as we're taking some of the questions from our EFT community, and we're looking at questions around move one, and hopefully going to be able to provide a bit of a framework for some of these questions, as well as some handholds, and try to approach it in a way that can help not only build confidence and add more of the foundational understanding, but as well as give a little something that you can put into practice. So I feel grateful to be having this conversation with you all.
All right. Well,
Likewise.
we enjoy it. It's nice to be in the conversation.
To my microphone. It's never ending. All right, we're going to get it
It's
together.
so wild.
So let's dive in. Where we're going to start is an important question that was submitted to us about how we really begin to get both partners' perspective. And so the question to kind of open that is, how do we make sure we're getting both partners' perspective about what happens in this cycle before deepening? Because I want to go for the good stuff.
There are several questions in the question. Right. And so one of them is that inclination to go for the good stuff. We'll talk about that. And then the other is the significance of getting both people's perspective. And I'm going to say something that's going to sound very silly, but one of the biggest tools, if you will, to help with that is understanding what move one is really about anyway. And it's, I think, something very unique that we bring to the therapy experience in doing marriage, couple, and relational therapy than other models do. And that is a systemic perspective. So why am I saying that? I say that because most of us are trained in individual therapy, and we're trying to get the client or one of the partners' emotional experience and try to understand it. But what the EFT therapist is doing is very unique, in my opinion, or at least in my experience, is that we're approaching this systemically. And what I specifically mean by that is we know that the problem is a dynamic that significant others have created over time that has a really negative impact on their connection and often creates conflict. And that's a very unique perspective. And if we're looking at it systemically, we can't move forward without having both people's perspective, because it is the intermingling and the interaction between them. And from our perspective, the way emotion gets organized under each of their action tendencies, each of the reactive steps, that helps bring forward and elicit the system. That's our whole job. And move one, especially right when we have finished our assessments, we're moving in with a framework that's quietly in the background. And the questions we ask and the way we're trying to understand people's experiences, how do they end up interacting, or how do they end up talking when they bump into that conflictual moment again? And that gets organized by emotion. So the system is both people, or if there's more than two people in a relationship, all persons, right?
Right.
And that, to me, has been very helpful. That's a handhold. I know that I haven't completed move one until I do have both people's experience. It was kind of like cycle light, not a deep dive, but we want to get a scaffolding. And that gives us then a foundation to move into the more rich emotional experiences that we would go to toward move 2. But we need that. That is good stuff, actually.
I think the way that you talked about it in externship that made sense to me is really understanding the action tendency is the trigger for the other person. So action tendencies become the other person's cue, and then they do their action tendency, which becomes their partner's cue. So that's the interplay. And if we don't understand the interplay between what's happening, then we aren't working with a cycle yet. If I don't have the interplay, is that?
Yeah. I would just say, knowing that we are trying to elicit the entire system, the entire cycle, right? That's the issue, right? That if we're only focusing on one person and we get overly focused on one person, then the work is no longer systemic. And so just reminding ourselves that it's systemic can be so helpful, that there's this dynamic, it's self-reinforcing, people get caught in it. It has an effect on them, right? And we are bringing that forward and we're making it known and we're making it real and we're making it felt. But we start with the scaffolding about the moving parts, right? Like Magda Arnold's cue, appraisals, embodied feelings, and action tendency. We just lightly touch each one of those, right?
Can I ask? Go ahead, Sil.
But no, I was just going to say, I appreciate just even naming. The more that we hold that frame, the more naturally we will be called forward to hear from both people before taking a deep dive on any side of the street. So I appreciate just starting from that kind of conceptual piece of, well, what's the framework that the therapist is holding, because that will start to guide the interventions. So when we bring the systemic lens, it lends itself to hearing from both partners. So I just wanted to name that piece.
So a little bit of a follow-up question about that. How would you help someone coming in from a therapy program where systemic therapy wasn't the bedrock of how they understood therapy as a whole?
Well, that's a really good question. And I wanted to back up just for 1 second
Sure.
and just acknowledge something that you said, that so many people taking, training with couples do come initially from an individualistic training perspective. That was certainly the case for me. And it is a shift to think more systemically. And I think one of the things that's also really helpful in making the shift, and I'm kind of bridging attachment, right? Because we're not just talking about systems in isolation. We're talking about systems formed by attachment processes and by emotion, right? As emotions being the signals that are sent. So emotion as a communicator, but also as a shaper of systems. When we start to pack the system into an attachment frame, right? That we are wired for, and this is kind of going back to the beginning, right? We're wired for connection, that the disruption in our most precious relationships is a danger cue to the brain. We will mobilize strategies to navigate that distress, and that will send signals to a partner that mobilize their strategies and trigger their distress. So when we bring an attachment lens to it, it lends itself again to a systemic frame. So it goes together. I don't think we can talk about the system without talking about attachment, and we can't talk about attachment and systems without talking about emotion. So it kind of comes full circle. If you wanted to add more to that, Michael, either Michael.
Well, I appreciate you bringing in the attachment quality. These are significant others, right, who are in incredible distress. And virtually nobody comes into therapy thinking, good, hey, Preston's going to teach me how this system has hijacked our relationship. They want to blame the partner or talk about a topic.
Right.
So we're bringing something unique. But I guess the main reason just to mention this is I think there's great relief in remembering the system, right? We need both people's experience, because both people's experience is what co-creates that self-reinforcing ouch that just grabs people. One person's desperate reaction tendency that has a very different intention sadly becomes the very thing that sends the threat signal that you were talking about, Selvina. And then vice versa. Now, sometimes one of the things I found myself thinking about as we were talking about, sometimes people are very long-winded, or some people have been suffering for a long time, and their story is elaborate, and they may want to tell their whole story. And so the other piece that we haven't talked about yet is how important the alliance building is at this point in the therapy. Hearing people's stories, letting them tell it, making another session if it doesn't feel like we've gotten through the entire description of both people's experience. But there is so much quote unquote good stuff happening because we're setting the stage for safety and for hope and for engagement and bringing both people into the fold. If it's more than two people, again, all partners into the fold. when we are beginning to do the more elaborate move one. That's what I'm thinking of mostly right now.
Yeah.
Post-assessment.
I think that's a huge allowance for the listeners to hear. It's okay if that takes more than one session because you do need to hear it. But when you said that, it made me think about even a cultural attunement when I'm working with cultures that are not the same as mine. And I want to understand how their experience in this world as walking around, maybe as a marginalized person, has impacted and shaped how they move in the world. That might take extra time for me to be a student of their experience. And so that can be okay.
Mhm. Yeah, that balance is so important, and I appreciate you naming that, look, there can be a lot of water under the bridge or a lot of curiosity that we need to bring to make sense of people's experience, and that varies, with the clients that we see. And also, I think it would be an important note from a self of the therapist piece. Is there anything else that's lending itself to not checking in with both partners, right? So there
Yeah.
might be just lack of awareness, like, okay, I don't know how to make the leap to the systemic
Yeah.
work, right? That's just a growing edge, from a theoretical standpoint. Or is it a clinical application? I don't quite know how to pivot to the other person, which is just kind of more of a clinical intervention level. But then there's the self of the therapist level, which is there something that's getting in the way of me making space for one person? Is this person intimidating to me? Am I afraid that if I just kind of start to open it up, everything is going to bleed out? Is there something else between us? Is there another kind of alliance issue that's making me lean back from one person? So that would be the other question. What is getting in the way of me
Yeah.
balancing?
And additionally, I would say even our own biases, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another way of
Well,
Yeah.
saying it,
I
yeah.
was I was thinking the same thing.
Like I feel so sympathetic to withdrawers, or
Mhm.
Yeah,
I privilege one gender's experience over the other, or some version. We have
Yeah.
our own biases. So I think it was a really good point that you're making.
Yeah. I
exactly.
I could tell you as a pursuer, the thing that can trap me especially is when someone starts down that more emotional road, which is like, oh yeah, if I could just get them to share this with their partner and oh man, as a pursuer, if my partner shared with me like that, I would just be, man, thank you so much. But without having the opportunity to understand the other side and let them know it's like, I hear you too. And I get why you would pull away in these moments. Like without them being seen, I am setting us up for a pretty big disaster moment
Yes.
when the other partner goes, whoa, 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 whoa. But I can totally get it. Like I get it when I over identify with the sadness someone is sharing and thinking, if you just shared that. And it doesn't go so well when the other partner hasn't had an opportunity to be seen and be heard in this dynamic.
Yeah.
There's another aspect of this, and I would just like to say, especially for newer EFT therapists, we're talking about balancing the alliance with a certain quality of like simplicity and of course. But the reality is, and it's especially hard in the beginning of therapy where people don't know how we do therapy and don't automatically trust that we're going to be attending to each person. And we may be really endeavoring to understand one person's inner world and organize their emotional experience. And it can sound to the partner who we don't have an alliance with just yet, like somehow we're colluding with the person we're talking
Yeah,
to, right? So I
sure.
just wanted to name that.
So, on that note, that's where I think there's a lot of value to being able to forecast with folks. I want to hear from both of you what it looks like and feels like when things aren't going well between the two of you, or I want to hear from both of you about this most recent conflict or fight that the two of you got in. I want to hear from both of you to make sense of it. And I imagine you might have two very different versions of
Yeah.
what happened.
Yeah, forecast that,
And
please.
that's exactly. And then that tends to expand people's capacity to tolerate hearing from their partner when it's not necessarily tracking with how they saw it and felt things went down. And then
When
over time, the more we do that, the more that they've kind of learned, oh, that's the rhythm. Sylvina's going to hear from both of us, or Michael's
Yeah.
going to hear from both of us.
And they learn that when we just hang out with Sylvina and we let her do her thing with one of us, and it turns into like an enactment, we end up feeling closer. So they start
Yeah.
the therapy process more, right? There's
Yeah.
a lot that comes from that.
Yeah.
So
One of the
you were forecasting though. That's really cool. That's a really
Yeah.
nice way of talking about that.
Well, I think it's about being really explicit, right? And so I appreciate that, like, that kind of like, here's how we do that. We forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done some work with Dr. Hawkins, and one of the things I've noticed he does in his sessions is he will say, like in his lives, and he will say, "Hey, I need about 7 minutes with your partner." Like he'll give them like a frame really explicitly, and then he says, "And I will come to you." And it's really explicit, and you can see people settle down and going, "Okay, cool. Like I'm not going to be left." And I think that's what happens when we don't understand what we're doing in move one is people end
Mhm.
up getting left.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think the real important part to remember about move one is we're trying to get the systemic piece, seeing the interplay. And we do not want to interrupt our alliance by leaving one partner's experience to the side.
It's also for me bringing up one of the challenges. Here we are talking about balancing and how that makes sense and ways we can do that. And then there are the moments that come up in session that doing the check in, right? We have every intention of hearing from both partners, but then one person, it's kind of like there's a crack in the dam and, boom, they are crying and you haven't even had a chance to check in with the other partner yet.
Oof.
And we are moths to a flame. That's typically where we want to go and organize that and get into that. But then we've really left the other partner in
Yeah. It's
like
easy to do.
the background. It's so easy to do. So maybe we can chat a little bit about how to navigate those
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you to expound on that because what you're talking about is how do we contain that moment in an effective way that also allows us to see this bigger picture piece?
Right.
How would
So a couple of thoughts and scenarios, if I'm working with a couple and one person in the beginning just starts going there and is,
right?
crying and weeping and I haven't even gotten a read from the other partner, as soon as I start to see a lot of that well up, I would really try to just pause and lean in with a lot of, compassion and empathy and maybe just reflect and validate. I'm really seeing how painful this moment
Yeah.
was, or I'm seeing how much sadness you're carrying as we begin to talk about this. I want to make more space for that. Before we go deeper into that, can we hang just 1 second and let me check in with your partner? I want to get a sense of where they're at before we go much farther. Is that okay? Can we do that? I would do that if I think someone has the capacity to do that. If they are spilling over and they're like going deep and into a panic
Right.
attack or something bigger, that would be a different scenario. But that would be a first move that I would try. Some
Yeah.
version of that, really
Oh, that's super
gently with
helpful.
all kinds of validation and empathy to contain, pause, check in. And I'll say one thing, I've made the mistake of just following the tears, not
Yeah.
checking in with the other partner, even though I know I'm bringing the systemic lens and I should be doing that. And I do the deeper dive with all this vulnerability, didn't check in with the partner, set up an enactment, and whoa, what did it not land because this
Yeah.
partner was furious because they were
Yeah.
so left behind and they couldn't show up. So we had to do some backtracking there.
Yeah.
Would it
Or
be okay to add to that a little bit? Because
yeah.
Yeah.
the scenario you were talking about is doing a gentle containment of and a respectful one of somebody's
Mhm.
emotional experience and going to the partner. But you could also almost like pendulate, switch levels a little bit by naming and validating and somehow reflecting the emotional experience, but connecting it systemically, which started talking about them raising their voice. Now we have a cue and we're starting to work with scaffolding. I see the tears come immediately. Help me understand what that says to you. Can you talk
Mhm.
to me a little bit about,
Sure.
I want to understand this. And we're asking a more cognitive question, right?
Right. So you're sort of
We're
changing the level.
Yeah.
changing the
Pulling them
level
up a
and
bit.
then we're putting it into the systemic scaffolding or the structure, right?
Hmm.
Without kind of following sometimes the tug to take that into a deeper place, right?
Yeah.
So we're keeping it high level. We're naming it. We're coming alongside the person. We're validating. We're bringing empathy, reflecting, but also connecting it to the rest of what organizes their emotional experience, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Right.
So I'll make one more comment about this before I go on to the next question because we do got to keep doing that. We gotta keep moving the
Let's keep
show.
it moving.
We
But
do.
when that thing tugs at us to move toward that person's emotion, that is our own attachment system in action. Of course, we want to go do that. That's what the human experience is. Someone is in distress and we want to move to that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, of course we do. our
Mm,
therapist human self coming forward and wanting
right.
to hold a space for that. And so there's nothing going wrong when you're doing that. There's nothing, it's normal, it's natural, it's human. And we also have a job that our job is to help organize what happens in their relationship when this happens. So I wanted to validate that that's a really human thing to do.
It is human,
Yeah.
and there's also an element of learning model that's about unlearning. Like most of us have been trained so many of us, I shouldn't say most, but
Yeah.
so many of us have been trained to follow that thread. If that shows up in therapy, to go for it. And in EFT, we're actually trying to make sense of the whole cycle rather than do the deep dive into somebody's emotion immediately. And that's
Yep.
very different. There's some unlearning,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Right.
All right. So let me move forward
Cool.
a bit because there's another question here, which is when a couple comes in and they're just firing things off left and right? They're all over the how do you find a way to kind of grab this bull by the horns that's kind of going all over the place and say, hey, we got to settle in and get our focus and go into the work of our session?
So you're talking about like high reactivity, just really,
High reactivity
can
or
you?
even just like a lot of like they're both just throwing a bunch of stuff at you. Like
Mhm.
they're coming in just going, "Oh my god, we've had a week." Blah 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 blah, blah, and then so and so in here, and then my mother-in-law was in town, and then we had this vacation that we were packing for, and there's just, "Ooh, okay. Yeah, lots going on in your world. I can see that. Okay." How we seeing what's happening and then grabbing hold and saying, "Whoa, like where do we go in?"
Do you want to go ahead?
My first thought is to start at the beginning. I would join them and I'd say,
Mhm.
"Hey, could we slow down? What I'm hearing you say as soon as we sit down and start talking is how much has happened since we saw each other, and I hear it's
Yeah.
been really impactful. But really, the thing that I'm trying to understand that's probably I think more aligned with why you came here, if I remember your goals, would be to help you all kind of get your arms around this place you keep getting tripped up with one another. So I hear all of these things, and maybe some of these things are impacting the way that you interact with each other. So if that's the case, could you help me understand what begins to happen when you start talking about these things with one another that starts to tip you off balance? So
Mm.
I want to let them know I hear how much has happened, and I really want to just take a moment to acknowledge it and validate it. But I also want to, again, to kind of continue what we're talking about, shift this more into a more systemic conversation and set of
Right.
curiosities. Like what happens there that these conversations are not going the way you want them to, right?
Mhm.
Because that's really what they're asking us to help them with. Because then
Yeah.
once we get under that, we start to really see people's hearts. We see their hurts and we see their longings. But we want to first join, right? And then we want to kind of shift and refocus the session in a systemic way.
I like that.
And if those content things that they're talking about were not sparks for conflict between them, perhaps they're just downloading the many things the
Yeah,
school started and
exactly.
our planes were like, blah, blah, blah. So I love the way you were offering some handholds for how to bring the focus to what happens between you in those moments. If it's not, if they're just downloading content, sometimes I just will ask, validate that is a lot
Yeah,
that you're carrying into session. Thanks for giving me a sense of what you've been dealing with. And then just asking directly and tell me a little bit about how are things between the two of you
yeah,
since we last met, because it sounds like there's been a lot happening in your worlds. How do you see the relationship? And
yeah.
how has the relationship been? Have there been points of connection? Have there been points of struggle or just distance? Tell me a little bit about. So, just asking really directly.
Yeah, just steering the conversation back to the dynamic.
No, I have to say something that's occurring to me, and this is not the norm for what I'm about to say, but it feels relevant because it was about attunement. I worked with a couple that were in their 80s, just lovely couple. And we, for the life of me, could not get started in session until I heard about their grandkids, until I heard about their dog, until
Yeah,
I heard about
I'm
their
familiar.
gardening. So we kind of used that actually as sort of our therapy primer, and it became
Mhm.
part of our rhythm. And we would have a cup of tea and
I
we would
love
have an
this.
extended session. We would end up doing 75-minute sessions, and we would just build in like this is sort of our merging into therapy together. And they
Mm.
really they saw me as their therapist granddaughter, really. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
very
yeah.
sweet. I think, Michael, you know who I'm talking about, I think. But I say that because it was totally guided by attunement. And initially, it provoked all kinds of anxiety for me, like, oh, I shouldn't make so much space for this.
Mm,
And then it ended up being such like an alliance builder for us
yeah.
and such a lovely part of our therapeutic rhythm
Mhm.
and our sort of on ramp into our work. And we always got to really good, deep
Mm,
places and we just built it in, but we knew what we were doing, right?
I love that.
So I just had a need to share that
But it's funny
now.
how well you know your clients and their rhythm, and to go against that would do something to the alliance or
Totally.
maybe interfere with the container that we offer in therapy. So, that's a super attuned way of kind of navigating that. And it wouldn't be, to your point, the thing you would recommend to new people in the model who are learning the model. Hey, first sit down and start talking, because sometimes people will use that as a distraction too. So you have to find
Right.
how that is either useful or not useful for the therapy process, right? It's not one size fits all.
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a cool story. I know
I
exactly.
like that story a lot. 'Cause it reminds me of a client that I've worked with for a long time, and once again, Michael, I'm sure you know who I mean when I say a long time. But there aren't many sessions I can do if the wife hasn't asked how my kids are. Like, "How are the kids, Michael?" And, and she that's
I think it's
her way of
beautiful.
relating, and it's like, "Okay, we're gonna have to have that conversation," and that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So let's take this, one more step forward right after this break. I'm really excited to share with you all an opportunity starting in February. If you are newer to EFT, maybe you've just finished your core skills or you've been here a long time and you find yourself not knowing your way around the tango and in session you can't remember where you are on that map, I want to invite you to join a small group deliberate practice for the EFT Tango. This is a 10 meeting supervision focused on each move of the tango. In this group, we will discuss the moves of the tango, and then we'll watch a live session example of that move in the tango. Then we'll have time for role play, and I'll join each group to provide feedback for your role plays, and I'll be there every step of the way to help guide you into a deeper understanding of the tango and a more confident way of working through it. I hope you will consider joining. Visit www.michaelprestonlpc.com/tango for more information. All right. And we are back. So let's take that same conversation forward a little bit. This is, a lot's coming in. There's a lot of how do we steer? What happens when there's a lot of escalation and someone is really stuck, like really preoccupied and is having a really tough time? And their preoccupation is triggering their partner. And you've got two triggered, not just one to contain. Now we've got two people up in arms. That can be really hard to find our go in. So what would you say? How would you frame what's going on when two people are coming in, really escalated about what's going on? I think it's going to trigger some things that I'll name. It's going to trigger freeze in some therapists where they just freeze and do nothing. I think about the video that Sue shows of the Christmas lights.
Yes.
The therapist freezes, and then the next words. So, how did you hang the Christmas lights?
A great moment.
Yeah, how have you all learned to walk through those moments with couples?
Mm. They are hard moments indeed. I appreciate the listener who shared that question around high reactivity because, I think you named one thing first. So first, I think we can just acknowledge that is the cycle on steroids at play, up and running,
It's
and
going
it's giving
off.
us a lot of information. And the cycle has the couple, the cycle has the therapy, the cycle has the therapist, right? It's got everybody in its clutches. I would want to start by starting with the self of the therapist piece because it feels like and this is not a self of the therapist for all therapists, right? But
Yeah.
for many of us, we can get caught in that. Before we can do any sort of containment and intervention, we need to be grounded ourselves, right? And so that feels like step one is just even being able to acknowledge that you are off balance
Mm.
and struggling, is step one. is there awareness that you are getting caught up into this? And in order to contain, they're going to have to borrow our nervous systems. And if we are dysregulated, we're not going to be of help,
Yeah.
right? We are the surrogate nervous system in that moment. So first things first is get our balance. And sometimes we can just make that even explicit. I have said explicitly, whoa, there is a lot happening here. I can see that the two of you are really angry, really upset. We need to make sense of this. Can I just take a beat here with you? Because I can't track when you're talking over each other and I'm getting lost here. So can we slow this down? I just want to just take a beat here. And that gives me a moment to take a breath. Yep, you're breathing now. You're feeling this moment,
Oh yeah.
Preston, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Taking a breath, it helps to like just put my feet on the ground. It also brings their attention to me. So they're seeing me breathe, right? They're seeing me slow down. And it's a good moment when we call the escalation out. It's the beginning. It's dropping a seed. It's a beginning of them becoming observers of the experience as well, as
Yeah.
opposed to just being in it. So
Yeah.
if we are to say, whoa, you are in it, there is a lot happening. Can we take a step back? We're making an invitation for the collective step back. Therapist needs to get grounded in that space, but it's also creating a teeny little break in their process to also begin to be observers of the experience and in the moment. So I would want to start with that, and again reminding the therapist, every therapist out there, that this escalation is not because you are a bad therapist. It is why they are coming to get help.
At the same time, I would just want to normalize that reactivity affects all of us in very different ways.
Yeah.
There's a continuum, and we are where we are, and there's nothing wrong with that. At the same time, it's really good for us to explore that in terms of our own self as a therapist. What is it about this moment? Because more often than not, some part of us knows this is an attachment strategy, right?
Yep.
And so one of the things I would often say to people at that juncture to slow things down is I would roll my chair in there and just say, can we slow things down? There's a lot happening right now. And one of the things that I think we do differently than a lot of models, there are models that kind of endorse, let's just let people fight and just we're observing the fight and making sense of it.
Yeah.
We're not doing that. But we are going to get curious about what's happening. But I would often say some version of, listen, I know you're not here to repeat the same thing that seems
Right.
to be so distressing at home. And I want to make sure that I can support you having a very different experience in here. So clearly, the fact that this is getting so heated so quickly means whatever both of you are talking about is extraordinarily important. And the other thing is, I could pretty much, if I were a betting man, I could pretty much bank on the fact that neither of you can really hear what the other's trying to say. And
Yeah.
that's part of the tragedy, that you're in distress and you can't find your way to one another. So I was wondering something. I was wondering if we could just slow this down. I would really like to understand what just happened that seemed to throw things into kind of such a fast-paced, distressed moment for the two of you. And I know you're going to see it differently, and that's okay. But let's take a moment to be able to understand this. And I was wondering if you could talk to me. So when your partner said or didn't say or brought up this particular topic, help me understand what just came out of that for you. And I'd like to take one person at a time so I can make sure to understand you, right? There's so much that just came up. I want to make sure I get it. And I also want to make sure that you both get it. So, it brings up, people sometimes talk about in our model, there's such a Rogerian underpinning, and this pulls on us to be extremely directive, right?
Yeah.
Containing requires a lot of being directive. And if we want to really utilize these small segments of time we have to help people heal, then we have to be able to find where we are on the learning curve with our comfort level about being directive, slowing things down, taking charge of the session in that way.
Right. Yeah, kind of the moment flies in the face of risk. It's like, okay, I gotta drop risk for a minute, and I've got to take, and for some, I've got to take a risk, like a personal risk, to kind of step into some shoes maybe I haven't always had to wear, because that continuum is very different. Having grown up in a bit of a chaotic place, chaos doesn't really throw me into panic because I'm like, welcome home, right? Having to take some energy there and finding an energy within ourselves to catch this thing and say, whoa, hey, I see it's really kicking off right now. And that can be quite a difficult piece. And I think that because you're right, that people come to EFT and they're like, oh, it's this really loving and gentle and kind therapy. We forget that at times we've got to be really directive and hold a structure here for what we can get done.
I think what you're both speaking to is so important, and yeah, this is not the time to go slow
Yeah.
and, "Oh, I know you're hurting," and like that. You'll get both
You
steamrolled, and
yeah,
you're
you're
gonna
gonna be left
probably
in the dust.
irritate them.
It's
Totally.
so misattuned, right? It's so misattuned. It is.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So, just even operationalizing, I know most people are just listening and not necessarily watching. But, both of you, when you're talking about this moment, you both kind of sat up straight. Your voice is different. It's not going soft. You're grounded and you're containing. And that is really what is called for. And you're bringing the attention to you. So that feels really important to name because so much of our time in EFT training is spent trying to go soft and,
Yeah.
not necessarily, whatever, to really bring people down into more primary emotion. And that's not what we're doing here.
Not in
So
these
I
moments.
appreciate what you're both naming.
I think what we're talking about is so incredibly significant, given that this particular episode is so much about move one. When we have dysregulated couples coming in, it's pretty typical. This would be a time where you would see a lot of blaming and arguing and escalations.
Totally.
A lot of
And
blocks.
it creates so much safety when the therapist can move in and kind of create a calm in that,
Yeah.
right? Because then people start trusting the process in a very new way.
Hmm.
It's a very, very significant moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like when you were saying a minute ago, when you come alongside a couple and say, "Hey, I know this thing's got a hold of you," and kinda that's the framework we're holding, is this is not just 2 people being angry. This is people whose cycle has them right now,
Right.
and this is what happens when they're at home, and we know they didn't show up in our office just to have their cycle get a hold of them. They've really come to our office to get a hold of their cycle.
Right.
And I think
Mhm.
that piece where you were naming about just stepping into that spot with them and naming it's happening, I can see it's really distressful. The hard part is that you both can't hear each other. And then naming, hey, I really want to help you all find a different way in this conversation rather than running this thing to disconnection. Can we take a beat here, take a breath, and find a way through this conversation that leads towards greater connection for the both of you? And I think even just holding that is part of that framework around I have a plan here. And when you are this distressed, having someone with a plan is actually quite comforting. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, this one, somebody's going to help us. Like I'm stuck in the well, and here's someone drops into the well with me and says, hey, I know it's hard down here in the well, but guess what? I've been here before and I know the way out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very reassuring.
Yeah.
it's very reassuring.
Ooh. Well, we've covered a lot today. There's so much here about conceptualization, hopefully some handholds that have been helpful, but also just the piece about the self of the therapist. Because I think that's I really that's part of the thread that through all of this keeps showing up is like how do we not over identify or how do we grab hold of something and how do we really find our vein?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
If we can't, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to say, it just reminds me of that key question that every therapist should ask themselves: Am I stuck because I don't know what to do because
Mhm.
I still haven't learned this, or I'm learning, or am I stuck because I'm triggered and
Yeah.
I don't have my balance? Because maybe we've been studying this and we know what to do, but if we're off balance because something's gotten activated, that's a different story.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a key question to ask yourself in the spirit of finding our way through stuck spots. That's the first question we should ask.
I'm willing to take a bet here, but the times that I've been stuck, it has more often than not been triggered. Because if I'm in my sane brain and I'm sitting in my office and I'm thinking about EFT and I'm like, no, I know all this. I know these things. Like it's not a lack of understanding and knowledge. It's a dysregulation in itself.
That's right.
But both sides of this coin that we're bringing up are very triggering, right?
Mhm.
Whether there's something emerging in the therapy that strikes a familiar chord in our histories that isn't processed, right?
Mhm.
A lot for us. Or we have our own relationship to essentially that continuum of adequacy and inadequacy. I don't know what I'm doing. And that has
Yeah.
a lot of meaning, right? For a lot of us, that starts to speak to our life story. I can certainly speak to that.
Mhm.
Challenges and the pressure around that. Either can be very triggering, right? And so I say this because I know there's an enormous range of experience of people who are listening to this podcast. But for those of you who are new, sometimes just the learning process itself. While you're in the therapy setting and you're learning the model and this is not a rehearsal, you're with people in real distress in real time and you want to help them. And all of a sudden you're figuring, oh my gosh, I kind of have it in my head, but I don't know how to execute this move.
Mhm.
Then our inadequacies can just kind of eat us alive if we're not careful, right?
They can totally take us down.
So I would just want to also just make stump a bit for supervision and
Yeah.
isolating our experiences. Like this gets infinitely worse when we're alone with it. And
Yeah.
that's just a human truth, and it's so resonant with EFT. But find wise, experienced people that you can lean into and bring this to and help you process through it so you can resource yourself better. It's a natural part of the learning curve. I know I went through it for years, and it was really challenging. So I just really want to endorse getting support and supervision, peer supervision, individual supervision, group supervision. So you're not alone with this stuff, and you'll be able to metabolize it so much more quickly, and also find out you're not alone with it. Everybody feels some version of this at some point, and I just want to stump for that for a moment. I think it's really important.
And I'm going to add one more to the stump because I agree 100%. I would also say going into your own therapy.
Yeah.
There were a number of my own clients that helped me see spots that I needed to work on because my body was on fire when they
Yeah.
walked into my office. So I listened, I paid attention, and, going into my own therapy to address it was really important. So that's the other piece,
Well,
Yeah.
doing our own work.
I had a mentor, and he would say, just that's the gift of therapy. Isn't that amazing? You get to do this work and it helps you kind of get in touch with your own stuff and then process through it. And one of my colleagues was like, I am so sick of the fucking gifts.
Yeah. So many gifts.
They can really rattle you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We help our clients grow and they help grow us. And that's just real.
Absolutely.
And the growth process is usually not very easy, right? It's very destabilizing.
Yeah.
So we
Well, I'll
just
just
want
back
to normalize that for everybody.
Yeah. And I'll just back what y'all are saying. Michael, you've shared in an earlier episode that, we've done both of our extensive consumers of therapy. So I appreciate you offering that as well, Sil, that each one of us here have done extensive personal therapeutic work.
Yeah.
And I'm an avid consumer. I have not had a season of my EFT journey that wasn't in supervision on some, whether it was individual, group, or whatever. I've never done this work in particular without being a part of some kind of supervision.
Yeah.
And that has been a massively steadying spot.
We are still in supervision too. We continue.
Yeah.
No, we're trainers. I've been doing this for a long, long time.
Mhm.
Learning and growing and expanding our perspectives and making what's unconscious more conscious and become more aware, right? It's really important. And the other piece is if you really endeavor to walk the emotional depths with your clients in those really raw places, you have to know those spaces in yourself. There's no other way around it, or there's going to be a much lower ceiling to what the degree of healing you're really capable of inviting and eliciting in therapy.
All right.
All right.
I really appreciate the end of this discussion here. We are going to wrap this one up. And just thank you all for coming to the show today. We hope this was helpful. We will continue on talking about stuck places in the Tango as we continue to round out the season. So thank you both for joining the conversation today. I look forward to seeing y'all soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. We hope this podcast is an encouragement to your EFT journey, bringing clarity and understanding of EFT to your work. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts to stay up to date with each new episode. To learn more about training or supervision opportunities with Michael Barnett, go to michaelbarnettlpc.com. With Dr. Sylvina Irwin, go to drsylvinairwin.com. And with Michael Preston, go to michaelprestonlpc.com. Tune in again next time to hear more of this great conversation.